So there was a number of things that occurred after that explosion with Mother and Dave. Actually, there was two things in particular. Well, first of all, we knew we had to get the hell out of the house. That was the first thing. And then somewhere along in there, my mother was at that time was still a heavy drinker, and being in the Maritimes seemed to exacerbate that habit. And so on the weekends, she was still like a weekend drunk, and that's what would happen. Liquor would come in the house on a Friday night or whatever, and she'd drink for 2 days, and there was one night in particular when she got into the rum and got just totally polluted drunk. I think she crawled up the servants' staircase into the master bedroom and went to bed. And the next morning, she didn't show up, and we were like, where's Mother? And so I went upstairs, and she was laying in the bed, looking at the ceiling, pale as a ghost. And she said, "Listen to my heart." And I said, "Okay." And I put my head on her chest, and her heart was going like a trip hammer. It was really fast, like so fast that it was scary. It scared me. And I said, "Can you get up? Can you sit up?" And she said, "No, I don't think I can." That scared me, because I'd never seen my mother incapacitated by anything. So we called the ambulance, and she was taken to the hospital. And I guess something happened. She drank so much alcohol. I think she damaged something, because she came out of that with chronic tachycardia, which is just a really super thready fast heartbeat, and they couldn't get it to slow down. And so she ended up on drugs to regulate her heart rate for the rest of her life. So now there's another prescription drug that she's on, besides the downers, and like she wasn't on Valium, but she was on just a whole bunch of mood altering stuff, and Ativan, and now she was on this medication to keep her heart rate down. And she never took drugs based on what the label said. She self-medicated. That was part of her problem. So there was that. She came home all messed up, and she never drank another drop of alcohol for the rest of her life, which is astounding. That it scared her that bad that she never drank again. This woman had been an alcoholic her entire life, and she quit drinking cold turkey and never drank again after that. Another thing that happened in that house that was going to be just absolutely monumental to me. We had a little old black and white TV, a 12-inch TV with rabbit ears and tinfoil on it. And we could get the local channel out of Halifax called ATV, Atlantic Television Network. And there was a show on there every week. I think it was Thursday or Friday night, and it was called Up Home Tonight. A lot of people don't remember this show. It was a very well produced, slickly, really just a great production out of that television station in Halifax, which later became the CTV affiliate. So these guys were serious. This was a very good television station. They had the major news program every night too, called Live at 5, that everybody watched. Steve Murphy, the main man, he's still there to this day. He's a great guy. Was the main anchor of the show, and on it went. So anyhow, This show, Up Home Tonight, I used to watch, we discovered it by accident. We only had 3 channels, that one, and CBC, and I think we got WLBZ out of Bangor, Maine. And so one night we discovered this show, and it was so cool because the set of the show was an old kitchen, like done up just like an old kitchen. It had a wood stove, a wood box, kitchen cabinets, a sink, like it was a kitchen. And this incredible bluegrass band was the host of the show. Gordon Stobie on the mandolin and fiddle, Skip Holmes on the banjo and guitar, Walter Jakeman on the upright bass, and Billy Doucette on the rhythm guitar, and lead vocals, and a young lady named Trish York on harmonies and fiddle. And these guys were amazing, and I was already well into bluegrass at this time, and these guys just blew me away. And what blew me away even more was all the guests they had, which were entirely derived from the Maritimes, from from Newfoundland, PEI, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. That's where they got all of the musical guests. And I was flabbergasted by the amount of talent I was seeing on this show every week. And it just blew my mind. I was like, what is going on? Because I had never seen anything like that in Ontario. And I'm sure there's lots of musicians there, but they weren't showcased. And I saw some people for the very first time on that show, like Jerry Holland, Buddy McMaster. I don't know, just a whole host, Close to Home Bluegrass Band. The list is endless of the acts that were on that show that were just unbelievably good, just incredible. So that became a weekly ritual, watching that show. If I was allowed to do it. There was 3 other people in the house. Sometimes they didn't want to watch it, but anyhow, so that was going on. That's going to come into play in a big, big way later on in this episode. So by this time, we realized we had to leave that house for 2 reasons, obviously. Dave had lost his mind, and now Mother was not well. And we were easily 30, 40 minutes from a hospital, the Mounties, anything. There was nothing out there. It was just in the middle of nowhere. So we started looking around for a place in town. And we found it was a 4-unit apartment building, 2 of the apartments being in the basement and 2 being on top. And it was another low rental place, and we went in. We ended up moving in there, me and Joe and Mum, and this apartment's a whole other story itself. But it was a shithole. It was a basement apartment. Was full of black mold. We kept a dehumidifier running in there all 24/7, and it just buckets of water every day being emptied out. It was horrible. It was a horrible place to live. It stunk, and it was rough. And we had the upstairs neighbors from hell who immediately started fighting with my mother. So that was horrible. And the people across the hall from us were very nice. They had a big Doberman pincer that I loved, named Sear, and but so that's where we ended up. But we ended up going into this shithole. And so Dave, we lost track of Dave. Dave decided he was going to stay in that house out in West Dublin by himself. And we all thought that was a bad idea because of the way he was acting. We were afraid, that if he was out there by himself, that he might do something. He might kill himself. He was acting so insane that it was a little worrisome for him to just be out there all by himself, because, I hate to say these things, but there was something wrong with that house, too. There was something in that house that I can't explain. I witnessed some things out there that were unexplainable, right? And I don't know if I believe in ghosts or any of those things, but I know that there's things that you see in your lifetime that make you go, the old Arsenio Hall line. There's no explanation. You look for one, but there's not one, and so you go, well, you just chalk it up to, okay, well, whatever. But there was a lot of that going on in that house. Literally, there were voices in the house. There was footsteps in the house where no one was. There was things moving around from place to place that you didn't move. Just weird stuff. And I know all that sounds corny and classic paranormal, whatever crap, but it happened. I can't deny it. And, if you were to ask my Bob or Joe, they'd tell you the same thing. There's something weird about that house. And I think it was affecting Dave, and I don't know how much, but because he would have been completely. The man was full on logic most of the time, and he would have rejected it, right? He would have never accepted that there was anything in there that was really, real, and which there probably wasn't. It was probably just a combination of our, terror and difficulty we were going through. I don't know, but anyhow, we felt that it was a bad move to go in there, and or to stay there for him. So this is just how strange things got out there. After we left and moved into Bridgewater, we were still talking to Dave, I guess, and he came to see us at the place a couple times, and he told us that he started to realize that he had a problem. And so he told us that he had started to meditate. He was meditating in the evenings for long periods of time, like trying to get himself sorted out. So he was an avid reader. He bought a bunch of books on meditation and Buddhism and all sorts of things like that, and he started to practice, this meditation because it was calming, and he was just trying to get his head on straight. And so we verified this story with the neighbors at the house, so I know this happened. One night there was a thunder and lightning storm out there, which were quite violent, because it was right at the mouth of the river at the ocean, and the storms would roll in, just kick ass. And Dave was meditating, and he had achieved that sort of blank mind, black screen thing in his head as much as he could. I mean, to be able to do that is very difficult. And so he said that out of nowhere, this child's burnt face just popped into his view. And he first thought it was me, all burnt. And then suddenly there were two of these burnt children that just appeared to him, this visage of, like, it was horrible. It was horrifying. And he come up out of this meditation, and in a blind panic, he threw everything that he could into a bag and fled the house and never went back. He left a lot of his things there, and the neighbors, the old man, Publicover, saw the whole thing go down, because he was going to go down and check on Dave because of the storm. And as he was looking out the window to see what was going on down there, he seen Dave running out of the house and just squealing rubber out of the, and Dave just fled and never went back. And Dave told me that story one time and refused to ever talk about it again because it scared him as bad as I think he's ever been scared. And he just did not like to talk about it. A matter of fact, he never told me, he never talked about it again. He told us this story, and he was very upset when he was talking about it, and he never spoke of it again. And that's how he left that house. So, as they say, make up your own mind. I don't know, how much of that was just, pre-suggestion. He knew the story about the kids in the house. He knew about the graves. I don't know. But it scared him bad enough he ran out of the house and never went back. So he ended up staying with some people in town that were the same people that introduced Bob to his wife. They all sort of became friends to us. They were good friends to us, actually. And I didn't know them all real well, but they were nice people. And so Dave ended up with them, and then he ended up deciding he was already a master carpenter but had no papers. So he decided to go to Halifax and go to school and get his degree in architectural draftsmanship and architectural drafting. And so that's what he did. He went to Halifax, and that was into Dave for a while. He never came back to Bridgewater as to live. He stayed in Halifax until he left there. And but we'll get back to him. Me and Joe and Mom were in this horrible little apartment. Joe got a job driving cab, and which he liked, and it made enough money for us to kind of survive. When we didn't, we were, we took money, we took food and stuff from the food bank from time to time. It was still a pretty poor existence. We didn't have any money, but sometimes there was very little food in the house. We had to, sometimes we just had like biscuits and whatnot to eat, and other times we had plenty. If Joe had a good week, and when Mom's check came in, we'd splurge on some stuff. But generally, it was a rough time, But Joe helped out the best he could, and so the other thing that was happening along this time was my schooling. I ended up going to a school outside of town for some reason. I don't know why. Well, I think because it's where I started when we first went to West Dublin. I ended up at this junior high school out in a place called Hebville, and I continued going there once we moved into Bridgewater. So one of the things that they did to me there that was really another thing, just one of those choices, right, that somebody else makes for you that's wrong. It was wrong, but it affected my whole life. So when I first got to that school, I was ahead of grade because I had skipped the first grade, I think, altogether, or the second. I can't remember. I skipped the second grade because I was smart and I was already reading and writing, and school was a bore, for me in Ontario. And so they put me ahead of grade. I went right from 1 to 3. So when I got there, I was supposed to be going into grade 8, I guess. But the vice principal of the school arbitrarily, we transferred my records down from Ontario, and the vice principal of the school arbitrarily decided to hold me back and make me repeat the 7th grade. I don't even know what that is, but his excuse was, well, he'll be younger than he won't fit in. He'll be younger than his classmates and blah, 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 blah. So he pretty well ruined my schooling because that just, I was mad because I had passed the 7th grade, And here I was repeating it now, and school just became a nightmare again. Bullies galore. I was, getting into trouble with these arseholes every day, different ones. School became a nightmare again. So again, I turned to music. So there's a whole bunch of things that happened with the music because I was still just sponging up everything I could get. There was a guy in town named Bill Schneer, and he had worked in Nashville apparently as an engineer and a musician, and he'd moved back home and was teaching music. Had a little kind of a shop in the front of his house on Victoria Road up in Bridgewater there, and he had a recording studio in his basement, a real one. It was a tape, 2-inch tape studio. It was nice, and somebody told me about him somehow, and I found out. I went in there one day to look at the guitars he had for sale, and so I ended up at the age of 13 going in there, and he invited me to go in there and record. So I did. I went in there and cut 3 or 4 numbers, and it was the first time I had ever been recorded, ever professionally recorded, and it was instrumentals. I did a bunch of doc, is what it was, and so I then took that to the radio station, the CKBW. They ended up playing some of it on their. There was a bluegrass show on CKBW, hosted by Daryl Frail, and he ended up playing that cassette on the radio. And then somewheres along the way, and I wish I could remember how this all happened, but I don't remember because there was so many things going on. Someone took me to meet this guy at a furniture store on King Street called LaHaye Furnishings. And the man's name was Bruce Oakes. Bruce Oakes was going to be instrumental in everything that was about to happen. Bruce was a great musician. He played guitar. He was a wicked accordion player. He played a big electric piano accordion where he could literally play bass on one hand, and it sounded like a bass. And just a beautiful accordion player and singer and entertainer. He was very popular in the county. He played for everything. It didn't matter what it was, he was playing for it, right? They took me to meet him, and he took me under his wing. He took me around to these variety shows that happened all over the county, in places like Baker's Settlement, and there was a lot of them, these fire hall variety shows, right? And he introduced me to some of the other, the older musicians around town, and these are the guys I loved, right? There was a fiddler named Burley Oikel, who was a great old-time fiddler, and I ended up being really close with him. He was like a grandfather to me. And Donnie Wynot, another great old-time fiddler. St. Clair Zinc. Wayne Hiltz. There were so many players that Bruce knew. And Bruce was into everything. He was into bluegrass. He was into old Atlantic music. He was into everything. He could play classical music. He could do anything, right? So, yeah. So there I was. Bruce started taking me around. We had no car. I mean, Joe. I don't think Joe even had a car. He had a cab. He brought a cab home every night sometimes. But I had no wheels. I had a bicycle. I went everywhere on a bike. And so Bruce would come with the old brown station wagon, and we'd go off, and pretty soon we decided to start a band. And there was work to be had in the town. The town was there was a summer showcase they put on, and where they'd pick certain bands, and you'd go all around town and play these little outdoor things, like at the museum and the down on King Street. There'd be all these different little places, and so me and Bruce and I believe Burley on the fiddle, and this other fellow from up in Maitland named Wally Smicer, who I just loved. That guy was so funny. He was a guitar player, great guitar player, singer. He played an old J45 Gibson, and so we started a band, and I was like so Doc Watsoned out. I was like, we got to call this band the Beaumont Express, because I used to play the Beaumont Rag, and they learned it to back it up, and I'd play that. That was like my big number. And so we started playing out and about with this little crew, And so then everything just snowballed. From doing that, Bruce had taken me out as well to meet a guy named Ross Ramey, who was a banjo player out in Hebville, and he was the king of bluegrass of the area. He was a tremendous banjo player. Played a beautiful stelling banjo, and so Bruce plugged me into every place he could put me, to get people to see me. And I also became associated with another real famous fiddler in the South Shore named Robert Jodry, who was a great composer. He had composed tunes that Don Messer had played, and he corresponded with Mr. Messer a lot right until Don's death. And they called Robert Jodry the fiddling farmer, because that's what he was. He ran a cattle farm, and my mother used to make fun of him, say he always had cow shit under his nails. But my mother made fun of everybody. But anyhow, so I ended up touring. I ended up, well, we did. We toured, we played all around Nova Scotia. We played Debert, we played Western Shore and Chester and Lunenburg, and we did kind of tour around a little bit, And so I ended up playing with him and his daughter, and this other young lady played the fiddle. They were really good. He called them the fiddling sweethearts. That South Shore accent, oh, the Lord, those guys are some good, Like the accent of the South Shore is just hilarious. It's part Dutch and part Maine and part Boston and God knows what, but the way they talk, the dialect down there is just hilarious. The colorful people, and so all of these things started happening all at once. I was suddenly in the summers playing, that first summer living in Bridgewater, and the second actually working and making money. But I wasn't making a lot of money. Like I think when I played with Bruce, I might get $35 or $40 for one of these gigs for the town, and on it went. But I got paid a little money. I was making a little bit of bread, and like I said, not a lot, but enough that it was fun. And I, the seeds were planted, right? That was how it started. And Bruce gave me my first fiddle. Bruce lent me a fiddle. It's to this day is still around somewhere. I think Eddie Poirier has it right now, who's been trying to fix it for years because it fell into disrepair. And but that fiddle is what started me down the road of fiddling. I didn't have one. We couldn't afford one, and on it goes. Like so, there's all of this stuff going on, and good stuff, And I didn't really have that many bad experiences inside the music industry with those guys because they were all old gentlemen. There was none of this crap, and they were gentlemen, and they conducted themselves like gentlemen. I ended up learning about playing with other people because I learned in complete isolation. I didn't really know how to play with other people, And even with the work I was doing with Bruce and Robert and these things, uh, I was still isolated in my head. I still knew that what I was doing was, I had to play down to people, and which is fine. You need to be able to do that as a musician, is play at the level where you're needed. Less is more. But every time I played with these guys, I was thinking, man, there's no way they would ever be able to understand me playing. They'd never be able to get around Jerry's breakdown or the claw or Cape Breton music. Or I'm having to force myself into a certain role. And in those days, it bothered me. As time went on, I realized that is the true function of a great musician. The mark of a great musician is someone who can walk into any situation and fit at whatever level is being played. It doesn't matter if it's, Django Reinhardt, Joe Pass, Chet Atkins level, or, you know, Carter Family, Hank Snow. Like, you got to be able to fit. And that's the only way you get work, is to be basically a stylistic and ability chameleon. If you play out over people too much, they don't want to hear you. And if you don't play well enough, then you don't get asked to go. So, but in those days, I wasn't really cool with that in my head. I was like, I love this, but I wish I was doing what I want to do, It was weird. And of course, I never played, I think I only played solo one time. And it was at the museum one summer. I went and did a show kind of by myself, and it was incredibly awkward, and nobody understood it. And it was just like, because I was playing all this crazy Jet and Doc and Jerry Reed, and it just went over their heads. It wasn't their kind of music. It's not anything bad on them. It just wasn't what they were playing on the South Shore or anywhere else, really. It was a place I should have been doing that somewhere else, where the audience knew what I was kind of doing, right? So it was just a weird, and I was learning. I was learning about, well, rejection. Because when I played out too much and did too many things, audience didn't really respond to it. And so that was a part of rejection. You have to learn, is to know your audience, and all these things. I was learning all these things. Like, it was a massive amount of information coming into my head in those times. A lot of which I didn't want to accept. Because I really just wanted to shred guitar all the time. That's what I wanted to do, right? And I couldn't do it. It didn't work. So by this time, after that first summer, it was late in the year. I think I was still 13 years old. And Joe had made enough money that he went and bought a little 12-inch color television from Granada on payments. And we thought that was incredible. It was the first color television I'd ever seen. We always had just old, horrible black and white TVs, And and we sort of had cable, even though there was still only 5 or 6 channels. But then we started to watch Up Home Tonight in color, which was really cool. And then I used to watch it every week. And then we had no idea about this, but somehow I didn't realize, I don't think any of us realized that how Up Home Tonight found the players. We just were not clued in as to how all this worked, right? Somebody told us that Up Home Tonight was having auditions at the Wandlin Inn on the other side of town, across the bridge, across the Lehigh River, up on the hill. and they were having auditions, and they were open for anybody. And and it was they were doing it for a certain number of nights there. So, and that these auditions traveled all over the provinces. They were everywhere. So, I, still in this isolationist mode, thinking that nobody, because the players I was playing with most of them had not much chance of backing me up for some of the things I was doing. They just weren't familiar with the music. It wasn't really part of the vocabulary there. And so I was still forced into this isolationist mindset. And I still had my father's Super Scope cassette player that I used to slow things down and practice with and learn things with. I also recorded all these rhythm tracks to stuff I was learning, so I could back myself up with this tape player to practice things with. So I would play a rhythm track, sing the tune in my head, play a rhythm track, and then I'd play with that track on the cassette player. I'd just play it over and over and over again, perfecting the delivery and the tone and the whatever. That's how I practiced with this tape player. So, knowing, not thinking that even there'd be anybody even there that could back me up, even knowing how incredible these musicians were that were on this show, I recorded a rhythm. I put a medley of tunes together, I believe, and created a rhythm track on this tape player, and we took a cab over to the Wanlin Inn, and I walked into the lobby of that hotel and sat in the lobby in the chairs that were there, and I filled out the application, my name and all this stuff, and this guy came down. His name was Barry Bramhill. He was the producer of the show. Big, tall guy. Came down, collected all the papers, went back upstairs into this sort of a conference room up there, and there I was sitting with he must have thought it looked pretty funny. And actually, Gordon Stobie told me later about what they were thinking. So there I was, sitting there, terrified, not knowing what was going on. And you have to understand something, and my demeanor in those days hadn't changed from, when I was 9. I was only 4 years past the death of my father, and all the, sort of personality changes that occurred in me were still present. I was withdrawn. I was shy. I wouldn't look at anybody. My eyes were always darting left and right. I was just not in very good shape in a social situation at all. I was terrified of everyone. And so finally my name gets called, and I'm just shaking like a leaf. I walked in. There was 2 chairs sort of there, and then Gordon Stobie, the host of the show, and Barry Bramhill were sitting at a table across the room, a long table. They were on the other side of it. The auditioners were in the main part of the room, and I walked in and looked at this and kind of looked at the floor, and so what's your name? And John Cormier. What are you going to do for us? Well, I'm going to play the guitar. That's all I said. And Gord told me years later, he said, when you walked in there with that tape deck, I thought, oh God, this is going to be ugly. What is this guy going to do? He's going to play a Johnny Cash tape and sing along with it, or what is going to happen? No, I plugged the tape player in. I had it all queued up, ready to go. Press play, and I ripped through this Doc Watson medley. I think fairly flawlessly. I was so nervous. The adrenaline has always made me play better. And I just tore through this thing. And as soon as it was over, I hit stop. I put the case was right in front of me. Put the guitar in the case, unplugged the machine, grabbed everything, and ran out of the room. I didn't even stop to talk to them. And Gord said, when I just got up and ran, him and Barry just looked at each other and went, what just happened? Who is this kid? And somebody said, you better hurry because he's leaving. I thought that I had failed. In my head, I was like, I'm never gonna get on that show. And so I was literally on the way out the door, and Gordy run out to the balcony. He was up in that upstairs room. He ran out there and said, John, you're on the show, man. You're on the show. We'll call you with a date, right? I flipped out. I freaked. I couldn't believe it. And I went home, and that moment when Gord Stobie went out there and told me I was going to be on the show was the beginning of my career. It really was. And I'm going to go into this a lot more detail in the next episode. But it became the launching pad for everything I did. I get emotional about this because Gord Stobie is a really great guy, and I don't see him much anymore. He still teaches in Halifax, and he's still one of my biggest heroes. And I've tried to tell him he's a very self-deprecating kind of guy, and I've tried to tell him so many times. When I've seen him, I always tell him, you don't know what you did for me, and he sloughs it off. Oh, you'd have been fine without me, but I wouldn't have been. That was the thing that led to everything else. And then there would be more people like him all down through my life, who took a chance on this weird little scared kid. And, that he was one of them. He was one of them, someone inside the industry. People like Bruce Oakes and Wally and Robert and Burley and all those guys, they were instrumental in getting me to those points. But there was very few people inside the industry that decided to take a chance on me. And I don't know how to repay them for that. I just don't. So what I did was I just played my ass off, for the next 38 years. That's every time I play, I think of all of those people, and how what they would say now if they were living, some of them, and what the ones who are still living. I hope they're proud of what I did, because they paved the way for it all to happen. And the Beaumont Rag, that was my big number. I remember starting the medley with that because that was my big number. Me and the Beaumont Express playing all over Lunenburg County. That was the one that everybody, and then people started to like it too. They were getting into it. It was one of those tunes that nobody ever really heard around there. And yeah, the Beaumont Rag. Yeah.